Um, Thank you for having me here. I like to because it's nice to uh, find new schools. That's what and it's nice to go beyond Harvard and Princeton always. That's what and it's because like my experience in Wisconsin, at certain moment you can do sometimes with this unknown schools. That's what or more than with this kind of the known or highbrow ones. Sometimes you want more than and you fight more, and I think that would be that's what's nice to catch up and to have this opportunity. It's a bit improvised on a Saturday afternoon. I know you guys have dealing with finishing our project yesterday, and but it's anyway nice to speak for a moment about what we do and how we contribute towards the theory uh, uh, surrounding architecture these days. What I will do, I will have three chapters to discuss with you. One of you will come later and talk with me, who drove me up to this place, and we and I do this because it wants to span. I always use it. Try to have lectures and talks in order to reveal next step in our thinking and production. So it's clear that we cannot. These three parts, three PowerPoints, and they have a certain logic, and they are combined, and they want to span, say, this gap between urbanism and architecture, and wants to position architecture in a wider perspective. And actually, now it's the moment to do. The world is in crisis, and architecture, and we can learn from it. I think Jeffrey Sachs, is still one of the not uninteresting thinkers about that. We could deal with that. What we have seen the last 10 years, and we were part of that, and is indeed a growth of our consumption pattern, and we became quite greedy at that moment. We wanted to have iPods. We made this kind of art. This was a horrible picture about what you all should have these days in your house, and it was accompanied by this kind of products and this kind of food, this kind of architecture, and this kind of holidays. So not a nice product anyway, and that leads with this kind of income to one could say an enormous greediness. That and when I put this slide together, and we are trying to. This is a setup for a workshop that we are doing in Berlin from next month onwards for the summer, in order to deal with the post-crisis. That architecture in a way has this same kind of greediness. This is a recent image of young Chinese architectural officers who are super good in copying and dramatically good in rendering. Rendering has become, say, one of the ways to expose our greediness. The greediness found, say, an interesting moment with this tower. Or actually, Nachil wants to bring it one step further. They are one of my clients, so have to be. And with this kind of products, the greediness was accompanied, and even say some of us, say my uncles, I would say, the generation that just became actually famous because of this. So Norman did something with this. Frank, and this generation is that you can call with their from name. This is the generation before you were not allowed, but this one you and Zaha, of course, were. When I show this, when I find these images, then and I find it connected as a kind of what could say as a pre-crisis architecture. So what do we do with the crisis then? And okay, first we run away, we yell, we close our architecture, and we get rid of it sometimes, and it becomes poorer and poorer and very dramatic. And we maybe can learn from the past crisis what happened. So in the meantime, say our uncles and aunts are reducing their capacities because of that, and all kind of this complete inventory of all the in the calculation of how many people are leaving the currently our architectural practice. It's bloodbath, as it's a huge list of, and we discuss how we can use this momentum. Okay, some say it's indeed a catharsis, endlich Pause, am Ende. Sorry, in the end there's a break. We after the greed is good, and I love this. We can as well see that there's a kind of zombiness has given it to us, and that we can maybe learn in that way from the past. So, building during the crisis, a while ago, and that's what you see happening as well, we made, due to that crisis, we made complete other investments, and that's what one of the elements that we have to concentrate upon in the nearby future. So architecture is moving towards infrastructure, clearly, point. If you don't do it now, then you miss the boat for the coming 5 years to work on things. And so that would be my first recommendation for the school, to erase, say, the designs for museums the coming time, and only work on public works. That you saw in the US, as in this case in the Netherlands as well. It created, that was funny as well, in the former crisis, it was the breeding ground for a new kind of architecture, and that I find very intriguing. And with this kind of products in the Netherlands, in that crisis period, there was a strange combination of experimentation possible. I mean, they needed optimism again. They needed a spirit again, and exactly at that moment that could be made. And I think that's good to say, because at the same moment that this spirit could emerge these days, and we have to define that spirit and what is, say, the ground for that, we see as well in those former crises that these kind of architectures were made in the same moment. So there was more about fear and protectionism than ever. And that's what you see now again. I mean, this is a contemporary architecture in Europe, where we are getting even worse than new urbanism in the US. And it's and only because this is surrounded by pessimism and going back into history. So it can become very dangerous as well. And I think we have to see how we can maneuver with it. Of course, this crisis asks as well, what is the real crisis? And say one of your countrymen was talking about this, and so there is, but there's more than that. I think the energy crisis is at the moment happening again, very much there, and that will do definitely something with our cities. Will do a lot, and I'll come back to that later, with our infrastructures, and therefore with our urbanism. There is a food crisis that will imply that we are dealing with agriculture in a complete other way in the near future, and with our bioproducts. And I think architecture, the School of Architecture, should work on that and deal with it and suggest things. And I'm happy that recently, I mean, people like Dan Wood or here in the country are in a way working with that, and it's taken over a little bit what happened in Europe. And of course, this kind of crisis will be dealt with in a complete other way in the coming future. As you can see that we and you are leaving Afghanistan maybe faster than we expected before. So what would that lead and what would imply for architecture? That would be, for the moment, my question to you and to myself, and in a way to see what it can be. What we try to do in Berlin in the coming month is to start with 2059 and to find out in retrospective, or say in future retrospective, to imagine, say, different scenarios with this kind of, say, crisis, and to see what kind of globes or worlds or compositions could be imagined. We want to evaluate the word, say the current dream of where everyone is now heading for. I mean, yesterday at the AIA, I think 90% was about sustainability. I mean, everyone is doing it, so that's good. But then we don't have to talk about it anymore. It's like it's done. But in a way, we should evaluate it a little bit. We should be more critical about it in the perspective that I just tried to paint. And I still think that this is the best eco-city in the world because of its of its compactness and because of its social mix and with whatever elements you would like to add and calculate into the sustainability issue. Okay, a new model city should be made in that perspective, and I'm not going to show it tonight because I don't know it, but I want to find it out in the nearby future. Okay, how to do that? So as we started half a year ago the Y Factory in Delft as an institute for future cities, and I've been teaching at many places, and and yes, there were places in the US that wanted to have me as well, but I decided for this moment to be in Delft, next door in a way, and try to innovate that monster. I mean, I hate Delft. I have studied that as well, and it's a complete stupid peripheral supermarket. But it's in a way you use it as a catalyst to make something out of that. So it's a model of it's a proposal for how say a private office can collaborate with a university. It's a prototype. And later with West 8, OMA, and Arab, they will take the next steps in that. And I think it wants to therefore to find out what should be done in a commercial world and what should be done in a public world. So we follow another model as AMO. We try to do the research in the office as well, but it's impossible to pay for. So and we define, say, the limit. Say whatever you can do in an office, you should not do at a university, and vice versa. So in that way, I think that we should forbid all the colleagues that use currently students to make the same designs for a building they are doing somewhere in Lille or in Milano. I think that's hard to defend in a public realm. And we should use the university to do indeed experimentation, and you do that partly as well, but and to find ways to do that. So there somewhere is an interesting line to develop. So we base it on argumentation, which is, and we want to bring it. That's why the title of the institute has born, and to turn that into the main source of model making for the future city program. This is the current staff that we have. These are the programs. I'm not going into that. These are basically what we do. It's a triangle of three things. We model cities, we apply them, and we gather all the knowledge in a library that we call software. And these are some of the programs, and I will introduce them a little bit. So this was the moment a year ago, exactly a year ago, 1st of May, where we entered, this was 1st of April, when we entered the building. And there was no space, so we asked the dean voluntarily to go out in this kind of cabins, here he comes, so that in his office, it was here, we could get rid of the walls and made a good carpet, and that we then could be friendlier to our students that came in, and we started to discuss. And then at May 13, bang, this happened. And we were so a week after the opening, there's my floor, and here how it fell down. So I was part of the crisis immediately, and it was a better start for a Y Factory was hard to imagine. These are our elements left over. So we asked the minister, what can we do with it? And we got some money to do it. We have been teaching outside basically on Francine's building, and we gathered and discussed what we should do. We used our office for teaching. We gathered in airports and other places and made tents. And you see the Y Factory in one of the tents and worked there for a while. And we got, because of the credit crisis, this building. And it's an old building that by Fortis, and you have read the newspapers, I guess, who was the director of the university, what a coincidence, this building was left over and we could go in. So we are working on a plan how to use that building as a giant, say laboratory for all kind of architectures and additions, like a city basically. So here you see how we are starting to work in it, and how we make now, for instance, one piece here, it's lifting a roof, and putting a tribune in it, and say here it's under construction. this is our first, say, here the Y factory will be the coming years. So underneath the teachers and on top the students, and like a mini GSD, but then in a more provocative terms, I would say. And with this series of programs we are now starting. So we want to plead again for the visionary. I know my colleagues hate me for that, and we try to find out what a visionary can be. We want to talk about amazement, so we make a new book on world wonders. There are four books a year, and we have a contract with a publisher, and we think that when you expose students, then they work better, and they become more profound and deeper, and they have more joy as well, because you have something in the end, and it's not that you only have this kind of sketches all over the wall. So that's the World Wonder book. It's quite a nice design by one of the students. Of course, we work on green dreams, and we try to evaluate the green laws as they are, from LEED to BREEAM to the Passive House and the 3-star system, and want to know how good they are. So these are some kind of studies. How many, for instance, LEED buildings there are on the right side in the world, and it's only like 10 blocks in Manhattan. While BREEAM already has almost 20, like half of Manhattan. So let's see who wins. And I think we have to see what's the truth behind it. I'll come back to it later. We work on roboticness. So these are all kind of examples of, say, because there's not an ideal future city. They are composed out of, say, fragments for the moment that all have, they need a kind of an attention. So like we did in Milwaukee with the Skycar City, now here with the fully automized city, so there's no work at that moment in that city anymore, because everything works. Which I'm fascinated about how that will look like, and that these kind of things will reveal in the coming period. Of course, another element that's appearing is that we do so much with leisure that some countries are 80% of the production of their economy is about leisure. How long can we go on with that? At a certain moment, I think I can't pay it anymore. I don't know how to deal with that. So we paint the death of leisure in this book. Thanks. And we apply it then on different cities, like here in Hong Kong. This is kind of film that we just showed at the Business of Design Week in Hong Kong, to understand, in this case, what Hong Kong could do in that operation. So how to continue there? And so this is one block, I would say, that can give an answer to, can deepen the issue of the crisis and reveal, say, possible agendas and different corners of our upcoming cities. I go to the second block, and that's what has that then to do with architecture? And because you're an architecture faculty, so and you all want to become, say, famous, and want to make buildings. And I agree with that. We should make buildings. And how can we then? But what kind of buildings should we then make in this kind of perspective? I used that book that I made like 4 or 5 years ago, KM3, and look what we did afterwards in this last 4 years around the crisis, and see what this element would say, what is coming out of it. Because I mean, you never can do the perfect building. I mean, they're all very much zeitgeist. They're connected with that momentum in time, and so you need like an evolution of it. And I hope this kind of awareness of evolution, that to establish that better within ourselves, within my work, as well, and to discuss that with others. And that's what KM3 is about, or actually what after KM3 is about. At that moment, 5 years ago, because it's nothing, I mean, the crisis is now, but it's actually it's only a momentum of things that take longer in time. And so buildings illustrate, hopefully, of our buildings illustrate that, say, that time process. So at that moment, I was very much obsessed by this kind of landscapes. As you said before, like this is the world, an endless amount of shit that our ancestors constructed, and in any place, Mexico, this is Tokyo, and in a funny way, the Netherlands is producing that as well, but then with, say, new standards. Right? This is sustainable urbanism, as you see it here, but with the same kind of boredom and endlessness that is, again, question. I mean, that is not sustainable in the end. So what they describe on a more higher level is this. In that book is a gap between, say, the endless amount of production and the desire to produce, and the resources that are simply given by our planet. And so beautifully expressed in those days already with the ecological footprint. And still I love these slides that if we want to compensate that, we need more land and more like 3 Europes, and if we behave like Americans, then the world needs then we need 4 till 5 Earths. The nice thing, look, this is a while ago, and it's very simplistic, I know, and done by the Berlage Institute, but it's still love it, is that now, in the discussion of Bream and Lead, actually, and in trying to find out, and I'll come back to that later again, about if we want to bring it on a higher level, not only in buildings, because that's only a part of the operation, but if we want to bring it to cities or to regions, and we want to include mobility, which is a much more dramatic factor than some of your colleagues here in this country say, is that at that moment the formula of Earths is, say, the footprint is going to be established as the common denominator almost for those products. So what happened in that moment is kind of embryonetic and childish suggestion is now being established in, say, in the EC and in the other committees to use it as a model of how to measure our behavior. So that happened after KM3, and in a way I'm very happy that to show again this kind of slides. We at that moment we used that model of the space gap to see what can we do about it, how, and paint new worlds. This was one. Where we say, because I was criticized a lot that with all the datascapes that we made, where is your idealism? And because normally people are architects, they only talk about idealness. I said, datascapes was about idealities, because you wanted to show where the maximum is, and maximums are thresholds for a next step. So here you see an example of a kind of minimal ideology appearing. So in this case, we started to imagine another kind of world if we would open up our boundaries. One element. I would love that. What would happen then? So this was a motor that describes new equality at that moment that could appear. If we open the boundaries, people will go where they can earn money. So, okay, if the US has so much income and so many inhabitants, we know how much GDP per capita there is, etc. And if you open the boundaries, there is a certain equation, and I don't know what the equation level will be. I mean, it can be about 100% or 50%, but it's there are some theories about. But let's aim for kind of that equilibrium. That's where what will happen then. And if you use that equilibrium for a minute, then actually the US will absorb quite some people. China will be the same, more or less, as it is, because it's at the average, and Sierra Leone will be completely emptified. So this density would change it to something like this. Wow, now we're talking. Because at that moment, the Netherlands would have 54, I mean, now it's 16 million, and would grow to 54 million. And we would basically be with like, half of it would be African and Indian people. So it would be a total other, the Netherlands. So if we are idealistic, we have to accept change. I'm not against that. I only want to open, and it would maybe turn into a complete other city, the Netherlands. So if we add another ideology to that at the moment, and that's what just has been said as well, like if we open up the borders and we make the functions there where they are good, then the world will change definitely as well. That means, you see some hypothesis for that we do things, energy in certain zones, that's the energy map, that we have forests in this kind of zones, and that will shift indeed because of the climate, that agriculture will be there and not at other places, and go on, and then this would be the map of the new world. And suddenly okay, Europe has another role. I don't see any boundaries anymore. I mean, in maybe there's a land or a country in Europe which we call agriculture country, and that is like scattered all over the place. And what is nice about, for instance, Afghanistan, suddenly it has a kind of heavy role in energy position, and would give it a kind of meaning to that kind of zone again. It would lead, as Saskia Sasse would say, to more interdependency, to more trade, to more specialization, and therefore to more balanced world at that moment by this hyper optimization. And actually, we could grow. I mean, it would, with this kind of simple calculation, with this kind of optimization, I didn't talk yet about technological optimization. That's what we already can grow to 63 billion people. Fine. So we don't have to be limited only. Sustainability is not only about limitations. We should find, again, an optimized and a more optimistic perspective. That's what I wanted to show with this case, simply by following one act. That led at the moment to this denser cities. Yeah, like Manhattan, like that eco-cities. Can we make that again? And we did this calculation, and what would be the perfect Manhattan? I did it at Yale at that moment. So, okay, let's calculate if 1 million people, coincidentally the same as San Francisco, would, how much they really would need if there are no neighbors. And you do it all yourself. And for oxygen, for transport, blah, blah, blah. And it would lead to that amount of cubic meters, actually 2 by 2 by 2 kilometers, not so much. Here they are, pond. And but what is stunning is that actually the world of architecture is very minimal in it. It's basically energy, forestry, and agriculture that dominate these cubes, this our program. So why aren't you producing, and I hope to see that tomorrow in the show that you made, why aren't you producing that kind of, say, cities in that way? Why aren't you studying that? Why do we neglect that so much in our education? So this could be then, with all kind of hypotheses that's in the book, how this cube would then survive. I mean, valleys with forests. And I know I was not alone on this planet doing that. And I think the chronology of, say, the visionary city, and in this case the three-dimensional city, is interesting because it is always connected with crisis. And it was just before and just after a crisis in the 20s, in the 70s, and in the zeros. So, but that's fine. So what can then architecture do? I was wondering in that book, in that perspective. And then that I think is important, I will keep to that up till I die, is that architecture is simply a device, is a tool to maneuver with that kind of ideologies, with that kind of perspective, with that kind of visionary. And that you can do that with architecture in any case. That's what I want to prove in that book. So just a device that helps, almost in a prototypical way, to indicate that perspective. We did it in that book in a very spatial manner. We didn't order it by programs or by scale or that kind of things. Not interesting. We are spatial specialists. And then in a world of specialists, what can architecture do? They can spatialize. They can show how the world would look in a spatial terms. And we have to be very aggressive in that and very profound and very, in order to, and then we can talk with others, because we can limit ourselves and make conferences where you ask for 20,000 black-dressed architects to come together and talk only about what, but it would be better to talk outside of that conferences like here or in other places where you can talk with others on what the role of architecture will be. Anyway, these are some spatial techniques that we did. So I'll show you some and what happened after the book in a way. So how far can we go with that? We said we have to connect buildings in order to make this three-dimensional world thinkable, and we are working still on this zone in Rotterdam, small Dutch skyscrapers with small footprints, but they need to be more denser. The footprints are so small that when you put simply 10,000 square meters on top of it, the buildings become too slender and they start to buckle, and we need the neighbors. So this is happening here. There you go. And Pak, you need neighbors and more. Oh, this is actually not bad. It's not. This is becoming not La Défense, where you have only one dalle, one block, and then towers, but it becomes like a stabilized organism of three-dimensional connections, very porous in a way. So all the kind of dreams of the current colleagues are suddenly, by one rule, are leading to a surprising development. I think that's key, that we try to find perspectives, but in such a way that you can do it with simple rules, simple bylaws in the future, and simple, so that and feasible, and that's what we can learn in a way from this span, this gap between, let's say, the 60s, beautiful drawings by Peter Cook and others about walking cities, etc., but unfeasible at that moment. So, and in that way, now, with our softwares, with our knowledge, we can start to imagine it and suggest that and believe in it. So I try to do that in Pittsburgh. It's one of those cities which is very, well, actually all look the same. I have to, sorry, but all the Midwest is dominated by downtowns. They look basically the same like this, only parking lots and some buildings where there are some functions. So Pittsburgh is doing things though, as more of the downtown area, because you need to do something with it. I mean, it's very serious. So adding culture program, I think that's quite successful in Pittsburgh, and residential program. And here this is good because most of them are in the outskirts, as you have designed your cities the last 100 years. So, but how to attract people? So what we, so we suggested, let's make a park. Let's get agriculture in, and so that at that moment people would follow. And this was the kind of dream we had for Pittsburgh, that then maybe there would be a new conviction coming over. So how to do that? So our site is okay, it was simply a parking lot, and this was the program they wanted. This is the max. That is the envelope. So if you minimize the footprint, okay, that's already better, because then you keep a plaza, 4 phases, normal, and developer thing. So we split the towers, create a plaza, and extend it to the river. That's all. We made the towers so cheap, cheaper than cheap, because so then have some extra money for a park. So here you see this park coming. We constructed on ground a level of just steel, and we used the corners of the building as a kind of as a rail, and so you can put the park where you want in time, and it divides, say, office world with the housing world in this tower. So the park cost $30 million. This is not so much for such a project, and could be done in phases with those towers, say, like skirts that hang around it. So this is the current state of the park, and how it makes a new horizon over Pittsburgh, which is beautiful in springtime, like a pink cloud, and with this kind of inhabitants on this new kind of level, on the same level as the hills. So that's easy, so that you can immediately understand the link. And then underneath, a kind of with big holes, kind of plaza for where you go out. There are 3 cinemas in the Sockles, and that will lead to this kind of spaces as such. Okay. This was, of course, just before the crisis. The project is obviously stopped and on hold, and one could be scared that maybe the towers will be erected, cheaper than cheap, I told you that, and that the park will not be there in the end. So there's a risk in this kind of, say, techniques, in this Dutch approach, that you find that you make things to the bones and then give it. You have so how to make that juridically then, say, fixed. That would be what we can learn out of this project. Another, say, technique besides connecting is grounding. Use our existing buildings. And in the book I already explained about, say, that what can you do to make a cubic city even with 40 square meters program. Tiniest, because that's what we have to talk about now after the credit crisis. We have to make small things maybe. This is a project that investigated what on an existing building you have to do to make a village on top. So you need more infrastructure, you need some steel beams, you need waterproofing, green elements, and some houses. That's all. So we calculated it, and we and found out, say how to compensate it with the ground price that you normally have in a city. And there's after a lot of optimization, and with and I'll come back to that soon after the last slide of it, it becomes almost prototypical. So we standardize the structure and we just build it on top. And it's in a monumental area. Here are the stairs. You go up. Some of the inhabitants, they can go to the neighbor. They go down again, and bam! This is what we can offer. A kind of say somewhere between the ground and say God. You could find a new kind of heaven, and we simply painted it in one color for many reasons. One, to reduce the costs on details, because that costs too much, all this extra material that comes together. And you are all trained for that. And when I see any building here in San Francisco especially, it's like a collage of material. And in this case, let's avoid it and paint it with rubber paint like for swimming pools. I mean, it's pretty easy to do. And then, wow, you get everything is done in 2 weeks. And and what happens then is that it becomes almost like an object. It becomes like and that's what we want to say with it. It becomes understandable. It doesn't hide itself. No, it advocates a campaign, as it's now taken over by the municipality of Rotterdam, to have this as a possibility, and even in this case in a monumental area. I know we did have a trick at the moment of the building permit. We only had black and white drawings with a color code number on it, and they didn't check it, so that was good. And and then the UNESCO code came during the construction period of the building. So we have our first monument in my career now. That for eternal ways now, blue even will be as it is in this element. So we continue now with that campaign of, and even with one public building that we are now, actually next year is going to be erected. That's the Schielandhuis, it's the Historic Museum of Rotterdam. That's it. That's our design. You could say no. It is the oldest house in Rotterdam, but it was bombarded by the Germans, and they re-erected it in '68. It's a steel skeleton, basically, with cladded. No, like you do it as well with monuments. And they, but they have not enough space, so where to do it and how to do it. We can put it on top, it's hard, eh? And so what we do, it's a new technique, is we drill holes in the foundation and we jack the building up, say, like every week, one floor, so, and then bang. Then this would be in 5 weeks' time with 5 floors extra, and so without almost noticing, I know at the 3rd week the media will be there, but it's and without cracks and everything. And what we can do, we can add a stair and maybe a huge stair, and you put. What happens then is that the museum becomes more monumental than ever. It gets a pedestal and proudly shows the history as a kind of contemporary versed Troy. We try to encourage, say, the writing of the history of Rotterdam. And isn't that the Museum of History is about? Of, say, and we can therefore develop an historic museum in 2 ways. Or you burn things like in Pompeii and you put something on top. Or the reverse, you make you have the oldest thing the highest. So and celebrating in the reversed way. So that's what's now going to happen so yes, things are happening. This is an investment done by, and we did this research for this thing, because they wanted to put it at this other place. This is cheaper than to make a new museum on another place. So you can use the ground cost for the jacking action. The jacking cost about 1.5 million euros, and that explicitly is smaller than the ground price of another plot. So, and that's why the credit crisis now helps, because it's cheaper and we can build it for that. And we avoid this other stupid plot that they had given. So another technique. We can 3-dimensionalize our cities by every object to contribute something to the public space. You can open up our buildings, and I think the Mirador is about that. It flipped the patio block and put it on in a vertical way because there was an endless amount of blocks in that area, and you start to yawn where you're there. So how to then to change that is by showing this patio to the world and use it as a motor for a collective space. It is surrounded by different neighborhoods of different, say, kind of habitations, and in between those neighborhoods you can simply walk, go up, and we painted it orange because because it's a warm color, and to show that some Dutch were working there, and but it's very visible. It was it's as well for fire reasons, therefore, that this color is coming, and it's a meeting place. Oh, well, you all know this, and then this village, it basically ends in this soccer field that's like floating over the city. We wanted to have an escalator to it, but it was that has been unfortunately not made. So you cannot do everything. It's social housing, but you can give this, and I really hope that you can go there and in the evening because of this hot climate in Madrid. It's a fantastic cooling space. And this nondescript neighborhood suddenly gets an address. And what is nice about this building, in a way, it's that criticism was made possible. That as a foreigner, as an outsider, I could say it's better to flip the building than to continue only with the blocks. And that, in a way, I think that's we should establish a culture, and that's exactly in this credit crisis moment, that is dealing with self-criticism, that wants to be self-critical. And that's what I think, that's why I love Spain at this very moment, because more than, say, Denmark or Norway, where you can't do anything, where it's so xenophobe and so that there's no criticism possible. But here they allow for it, and I think that's what we have to find a way of, say, kind of intellectual self-criticism. What's happening here? I show this as well because we got a next block out of that, and here you see it under construction. And now then the mayor said, "Well, you did a good job with a tower, but the next one should be really a block. Come on, we cannot make endlessly towers. You cannot." And okay, yeah, but you know my feeling with blocks, and in your case in San Gennaro. And then he said, "You find a way." And that's so what we did. We made a block, and we remembered Le Corbusier, and he didn't make it, so let's make it. Let's use the social housing to open the block. And I don't know if the slide is in. This is the normal block, and we said, let's do this. Give everyone a garden. And after some calculations, we have now collective gardens where you have 2 to 4 gardens per vertical patio. So here's the genesis of the Celestia. A block, opening it up, okay, it was a little bit higher, but not a tower. No, it's simply a slightly higher block. And how here we started to turn it into like Lego blocks, and basically prefab them and put them on top of each other. That's all. So here, that would be a porous environment, I would say. And yes, you can walk into the patio everywhere, and you can look around and see all these gardens and that way. And here, how you see it over the last weeks, how, say, from every patio you can go and look to other places. And there's always a view to the environment, and there's always, say, somewhere, say, you can talk with a neighbor. So, yes, you can continue. And that's what I want to stress. KM3 started, but actually it gave quite we can go on with that without being repetitive. And I know that we always talk about originality, and we have to be very original every year because it's getting very exhausting, especially for our generation. Of course, Zaha is always the same, but that's and that's fine as her niche, and which I think is pretty good, but it's in that with conceptual architecture, it becomes tougher in that way, and that. But I want to defend here as well that say an oeuvre or a longer story can be very good as long as that story has indeed wide perspectives and a lot of range of possibilities to see every project in that respect. So I want to plead for a combination of say an agenda, a personal agenda for everybody of you, and to deepen it, to challenge ourselves that agenda makes sense. and to talk about it. What agendas? I think I would love to have discussions in the near future with John Novell or with others to say, is your agenda that good, or is it that consistent? And I think we have to develop critics now that talk for that a moment about it. And that's and I miss that sincerely in the debate, in how we say how this at the moment can be say discussed. And I think now is the moment to discuss again, because now we are all global. Now we're all dealing with the same kind of say problems. Next technique, we span buildings as well. And I use this as another example of behaving, say in that space with this way in a spatial agenda, and in a way very political. I will show that later. So here starts now actually on the construction our market hall in Rotterdam. Another way of this was the demand: make houses and put a market hall in between. Well, look a bit like what Miralles did in Barcelona, and give something with a nice roof, and that's it. Yeah, but this is not a market hall. Come on, that's Barcelona. This is Rotterdam. Rotterdam deserves something more visible, more stronger. I mean, it's a city of accidents, and so why don't we make a bigger accident? So what to do that in that way is say, okay, let's flip the building, and then then we are talking. Now we have a hall, a market hall, where you can really absorb the public activities inside. So said the client, developer, nice idea, but I can't sell these houses. They don't have a view on top. There's a like, oh, okay, we make them. Give them all a view, and yeah, but this is too expensive in structure. Yeah, you're right. We have to make it more Roman, and that's easier to construct. But then no lift fits in. He said, "That's okay. We shape it up," and then that was done. So he said, "Yeah, but I want to build it with simple technique, with Dutch technique. We make tunnels always and pour concrete over it, and we use it, pull the tunnel out again, and put it in on top, steel elements of the casting, and to bring that's the cheapest way. Why you don't do it, I don't understand." And it's so this is how you start, and because the nice thing of tunnels is that you can push them 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters, pok, a meter, out of it, up, and pok. And suddenly they touch each other, they kiss each other. So this moment of construction next year, because the basement is huge, that takes a year, is you can see this literally happen, pok, 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 and it's done. That's all. It's a social housing again. Use social housing, but then give a space back towards it. No details in the end. Simply, okay, geraniums outside, but only one detail inside. Openable windows, so that from every kitchen you can yell downstairs that you want to have bananas instead of fish to your kid when he's going to do the shopping, and that you live behind the screen. So for all the advertisements, all the tableau vivants that are thinkable. Of course it's happening at more places, but I love that we make a screen that makes space now, and that turns into in a public space where light and enlightenment can be combined. And so that's what happens. This is 1 hectare of LED, and that's the only, and we can only afford it or get it because of the advertisements that we are going to make. In it, so that will be now there. So we use that spanning act as well in Tirana, and I show this because I love Tirana, and because it's the poorest place of Europe, and it's like this is how it is at the moment. It is it's pretty dangerous. I mean, every moment we are escorted by policemen in order to survive, and it has a very remarkable function in the credit crisis because it has only black money, so you have no problem at all with banks. So you can build, and there's a fabulous mayor that's then who is going to be elected as president in the coming months now, and where we directly work with him in order to make different projects in that city, and with low budgets, low technology, and with low fees in a way as well. So why do you do that? I could say it's simply a love affair. Simply like here you can build up a country and a place that has a limited history and has tons of energy. And I think that's what we have to find out again, because China has lots of energy these days. Europe had it, and that we have to redefine our energies. And I think this could be a model for that, to develop it. Eddie did it. Eddie Rama is the name for this mayor. He painted in the past already some of the social housing after the chaos of the post-communist momentum in Tirana, in Albania, and led it to this kind of products. He cleaned up some of the bassins. I mean, this is like Barcelona did in the 90s. In the 80s, he did it in the zeros in a way, but then without architecture at the moment. This is only what happened in a very short moment. So this is our first building in Tirana. I mean, that is already erected, and we are going to paint as well with a quite nice advertisement to say we love Tirana. And this is our second building. It's it's a park. Now they're digging the ground now. We won a competition with this, with a market hall, which is basically made by offices that surround this market hall and lead to a kind of hill, so that you can walk between the two parks. And it was a beautiful project, I think, this kind of element going. It was a while ago, already 5 years ago. And then after winning it, say 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, the client came and said, "It's beautiful, but we cannot make this. We have only B25 and not B80, what you need, like in Wolfsburg, to make this building. So how to do that then? How can we turn this?" And you can, at that moment, you can run away or make a new project. What are you going to do then, as an architect? And so then we asked the engineer, and not over Arab, because at that moment you can't use them, because it's about cheapness and it's about local technique. And they, so what can we do? And the local engineer said, "Okay, I can give you concrete, B25, and then in every floor you can maximum make 2 meters span with that slab of floor." And it's rough concrete, very open and you know. And so okay, so let's do that, and that's what we did. That's what you see here. And actually, so the stepping back leads to terraces in the different offices, and to an interior where you have shopping on, say, different levels, and where paths are now created to the roof, which where the restaurants will be. And what we then did, and it caused actually an interior, which I find actually maybe more spectacular than our first, say, sketch in a way. Where this is halfway, this is the ground, the zero level, and where it goes down into the garage and going up, where upside and down and above and below is almost the same. And we clad it with one material, with recycled mirrors from the local market, the black market, and they and then you get this. That's all, and everything is with the same kind of pattern of mirrors. So you will be, I think you'll maximize. And that starts. So next week I will be there for the first grounding of that. And that again came free. I mean, again, the thing starts to develop. I mean, you bring it one step further, and you bring it wider. It's a general perspective with very local, say, adaptations. Here, I think the generic and the specific come together. We have talked a lot about this in the last 20 years in all your auditoriums here in the US about that combination. I think with this way, I hope, in a kind of simple manner, to show how they don't bite each other. You have not to be afraid of it. We just have there's more genericness over the world than some of us want to accept, and talk endlessly about identity. But on the other hand, it's simply because of the constraints, the local constraints, this adaptation of the generic leads to new beauties and new traditions almost. So the same technique, okay. Because then in this case in Gyeongju, which is a new town just next to Seoul. This is what all the Asians dream about. In East Asia, it's like mountains everywhere. And Feng Shui is about this, mountains and sea, and somewhere in between you live. So, but there's a stupidity going on, and I want to be open about that, because I think it's this endless filling all the valleys with this kind of towers, maximum 100-meter high, and leaving then these hills as the last resort, is killing the landscape. It's killing South Korea. It's killing Taiwan. It's and I don't think it's a good idea to do it, because ecologically it's a disaster. I mean, ventilation is horrible in those valleys, and the hills are still not you cannot go into them because they're too steep, and there is no money left to turn that into real usable points. So how can we then change that? And we do different projects. I only show one of them in this case that wants to convince say other ways to deal and to live with the valleys. So here's one case. This is our new shopping center, mixed center that we are going to build, and this is basically the ingredients of all the shopping centers in Asia. You make towers, and they're a clone of the same towers basically. You make a plinth where you put in shops, and you add a water plaza to refine that, and then you rent an architect to style that. If it's Jerde or if it's OMA, it doesn't matter. They all look in a way ultimately. So here you see some beautiful examples of what have been produced: towers with sokol and water, towers, sokol and water, towers, Evian bottle and some water. So are we going to do the same? This is the context of the site, and what is the site, and what actually we are between two hills, and we have to deal with that topology. We are not allowed to change that topology. So that's the restriction. So how can we actually then make this better in a way? So we said, you love this. Okay, we make it for you. And and it's actually it's not so complicated. So instead of a valley, we make extra hills. And how to do that? This is the program basically in more layers. What they want: shopping plus houses. Just for one moment to see how much levels you need. This is the FAR then completely filled. And you say, okay, let's push them up here and there. And if you push them up, you gratuitously get cupolas underneath. Cupolas for orientation. And that's what you see with this tapestry. They go up and down, and you get great spaces. And that's what shopping is about. You go from space to space to space. It's like endless grottos that we are to make. And actually, and then all the houses get terraces. And gratuitously, one could say, with this deformation act. And here under you see the cupolas. So it became a technique as well because we're always surrounded by retail specialists at the moment, and they work with blob diagrams. So so you have a circle and another circle, and this type of move around. Okay, any circle, fine. We just literally make it. Whatever routing and targeting and all these terms that you know, you can simply position it and get. And then what we do, we make a catalog of structures built based on the concrete method in this case in Korea, and then you give it simple different sections, and then you choose offices like this, hotel, great hotel, department store, very useful in that way. And this selection that has been made by the developer, fine, and how they now position, fine, and how they. But then this is the parking. Here you see how the plans are developing and up till pop. There it is here. So this is what it is, not more, not less. This kind of, and what we only added at that moment with is one material. The mayor insisted on ecology, and that helped us a lot. So we came. This is the boxes that we are going to use everywhere, which is a good breeding ground for birds and for insects, and therefore the hills or they become almost like a breeding ground. We plant them at every floor because we made terraces, and actually due to that now the client cannot go back to make them straight again, because this plantation is how it is now formulated, is like the key of the element, and it leads actually then to this kind of environment and say spanning the public space again as a tool. And so now I end. I want with the third part. I gave you some examples about how to see buildings as a device in that wider discussion. Now bring it back to the bigger scale. 2 days ago, the opening was done with Sarkozy, President of France, to design his Grand Paris, his Greater Paris. And there are 10 architects and 10 plans, and you can go there in the Palais de Chaillot and to see them with all its glory. I think it's fantastic. You can say what for Sarkozy what you want. Politically, I'm not always have the same opinion as he has, but I think it's needed that people become strong in a spatial manner as well. I think it's courageous that he wants to do something about this city, Paris, and to turn it into again, it's like a leading city in Europe. Of course, that coincides and goes together with his way of ruling Europe and his perception of that. And one could say there's a new Rome that he wants to make. Are we then becoming the new Albert Speers in that respect? Or is a kind of new interpretation of Haussmann considerable? I love Haussmann because I think it was a marvelous architect and he did a great job at that moment, and by cleaning this shitty Paris at that moment. So this is, and of course it's France, and you have to play with words. Everything is about talking. So this is the first word, of course, Paris, and that means challenge in French, and that can be easily done for Paris. We have to talk about more, so Paris plus, ça c'est clair. But we do it in a very small way. Paris plus petit. That's what the story is about. And it's clearly about intensification. And so we do it with a different team. So first some words on the process. We worked together with one of the universities in Paris. I mean, France is basically ruled by universities, not like in the Netherlands or in Germany. But it's or in the US, but but here universities do things for the state. So these are researchers, and so we worked with them on, say, to evaluate Paris, the performance of Paris. I'll come back to that later. And which can be grasped as a kind of interesting, say, separation between two milieus. Everyone knows this. There's a beautiful center of Paris, and which is like dominated by Haussmann in this manner. But it's only 5% of Greater Paris. This is actually Paris, and it's. I showed you films before of Mexico and about Tokyo, but Paris is definitely part of that environment. 90% is. Moche, as we call it in French. So this new word has been given now, and you can read it in the newspapers. Mocheness is now accepted as a term by Sarkozy to explain the gap between the rich center and the poor quality of the banlieue of the greater Paris. And that is clearly expressed when he made hundreds of these films, and you can see them all. And they're try to go through the banlieue of Paris, and oh man, you are desperately want to go out of it after 2 hours. So the second book we made is a series of reflections. The university took complete care of that with a series of articles, and we started to discuss what kind of direction should we go. Sarkozy asked us to make a new city. Again, a ville nouvelle. And so should we extend Paris or not, is the question. And so we gave him, and I'll come back to that later, a third book, and that's a calculator. I thought that would be wise to say, give you a calculator, how good is Paris? No, how good is Grand Paris, in that way. And there we have Braham and we have Lead, but not on a city level. We need a calculator that says how good cities are performing in an ecological way, in a cultural way, or in whatever way. So that's what we propose to him, and we make the synthèse that I want to present to you. So this is Le Grand Paris, the Grand Paris. It is, and it is fantastic to see that Paris is actually an exemplary city in urbanism. It is, I mean, Le Nôtre has made this fantastic access from the Louvre to La Défense. Haussmann was indeed brilliant, as I explained before. The Tower of Eiffel, I love it. the grand ensembles, where the poor people were living and what has been built in the 50s, are a French invention, and they are not bad by nature, because they have given the city a tremendous amount of, say, real estate value that they can still deal with. And I think that's one of the reasons why in the credit crisis now investment in social housing will happen again. They made Ville Nouvelle, some good, some bad. They made La Défense, they made RER's, the best train system I think any of the metropolises has, almost. There was a national library, and there was intelligence as well. I mean, I love still the theories by some of the philosophers in the 80s, Virilio, etc., and Baudrillard, that are born here. I mean, Paris is a breeding ground for urbanism. And so and some of them maybe are not built, I could say. Then this is a very beautiful one on Jonas Friedman. I still love it. So we simply modeled it, everything, and we showed the library to Sarkozy. So you have a great tradition. You're not alone in your past. I mean, this is by Paul Maimot, the fantastic idea that is now built in Santiago de Chile, how to go underneath the river and to use it as the major infrastructure. And I loved the Jean Nouvel's tower, unfortunately not built. And I worked on this for OMA when I was a kid, which I still think is a fantastic plan that has been done. So Paris is basically a breeding ground for urban thinking, and that's what I see in this commission to give that a next step in that way. But I know there's a lot of skepticism as well, and one can say that at the same moment that's a breeding ground, it blocks thinking. I mean, people say, oh yeah, Le Corbusier, horrible, and that's so there is how to go beyond that exactly at this moment. How to do that? So. We wondered what the word grand actually means. Is it size? No. It means actually grandeur. It means something like grand is when you behave exemplary and with a kind of vision as such. That's, I think, the word grand. So how to define that? And yes, with this ocean of mediocrity, which is divided in 153 communities. A nightmare. This is worse than the Balkan area, because you cannot, if you want to do one road, you have to talk with 60 mayors. This is the challenge. This is the Grand Paris de Paris, because you have to get everyone together. So we have to find a way to deal with that, and that's what we are now working on. And we can use the crisis. That's clear, to innovate. So the grandeur is based. That was our commission. Have to be an idea about post-Kyoto, and so what can that be? And we based it on KM3 in a way. How can Paris be exemplary to span the gap between our desires and the spaces that we have? And it easily can lead to autarcy, I know, but this autarcy can as well help to formulate a program. What we say, but in a way, this, and that's the ecological agenda, is not about more, about less. It should be about more, because, and that's what you see with Bream and all those things, less windows, less energy, less architecture, only green roofs, and it's becoming almost like, no, we have to be more aggressive in order to innovate, in order to compete, and I think the competition between cities helps. So let's be plus ambitieux, plus responsable, etc. We made a whole, say, program for Paris where they could, in a way, define their directions in it. And we say, how can you calculate plus with a city calculator? That's clear. We have to measure our ambitiousness and our responsibility, and that's what you see here. I'm not going to explain the model about this calculator, how it's going to work. And then we can judge Grand Paris. And we did that in different ways. We looked to the economy, and we saw that there's a lot of tourism in Grand Paris. But actually, most of the tourism is in Paris, and Euro Disney. That's the only place where we go to. And so we should do something about it if we want Grand Paris functioning as a grand machine. About the employment, Paris, the center of Paris is very dense and is rich, but Grand Paris is not. It is poorer than many places in Europe as such. So there is something to solve. In employment as well, most of the unemployment is in Grand Paris. In the ecological terms, wow, Grand Paris doesn't perform that well when you compare that with other, say, cities and states. Or in pollution, it's is quite big. So we think Paris is good. Grand Paris is not. That's what I only wanted to stress every moment in the discussions last half year. Same with about the transport. RR is good, but actually it's a low percentage of people that use it, and especially in Grand Paris. In Paris they do, but in Grand Paris not. And then, but most of the Parisians and the Grand Parisians, they drive, and it's actually the same as in Los Angeles almost. And so they were shocked about this data in a way. So we made that for a whole list and to compare them, even with the society, how they live. When the quality of life in Paris is great, Grand Paris is mush in that way. It doesn't work in that way. Or how expensive it is in Paris and how cheap it is in Grand Paris. How dense it is in Paris and how not dense it is in Grand Paris. So in total there was a score of this performance, and that's when you can start to compare with other cities. And then you can make a program, an ambition, what you want to do for Grand Paris in the nearby future. So what would that be if we want to be exemplary, grand, and unique? So we calculated very simply, like we did it in KM3 in a way. In order to be responsible, you have to clean your water. This is the amount of water you need in order to do it for an existing city, and maybe 2 million people extra in the future. How that leads to 14 million people. That's the amount what you need to add in order to make a good water system for that town. You need so much forest in order to compensate up till 2030 your behavior in that way. We need this amount of energy sources in order to make a more sustainable energy agenda. We need to improve the accessibility in order to make accessibility which is flux, which is equal, and where everyone uses both a car, I'll come back to that later, and a train. And we have to invest in other kind of housing, because some of the houses are too cheap. That's another program that could be. We have to attract certain kind of economic activities that leads to basically do this. So this, like Independence Day, this is what's hanging above Paris, and what we should, in a way, this is what we give to you. This is our gift. This is Sarkozy's gift to the world, to Grand Paris. But that's great, because where do we put it at that moment? WAP. That's now we can talking. Now we become architects again. And what shall we do? Now let's spread it. That's what Sarkozy initially wanted. And then what you get? I mean, it's bigger than Los Angeles. This is an endless tapestry. Or let's say, do it only in the poor areas. Let's behave for a moment very political. And I saw the president a bit looking like, But then actually you would have quite a beautiful landscape. Oh, there you see it. And it's no one can be against it. Or if we copy Haussmann, and say we change the whole banlieue into an extension of something which is good. And actually, it's not bad. If you see here, come on. Wow, now I have really Haussmann everywhere, and it would lead to quite a compact city in a way. Oh, and this, of course, as a joke, if we do it only, very compact, if you want to be very exemplary, simply put on La Défense, you put everything, and that looks quite good. It's maybe the Eiffel Tower is a bit ridiculous at that moment. It's kind of funny, and but you would have a moment, say, where you could say look over your city again. We make a new butte, a new mountain, from where you can observe and observe your city. Okay, but then they asked us, is it really possible to densify and intensify Paris? And we made an inventory. Yeah, il y a de l'espace, and so we made an inventory. We can use some zones around the water, easy to build. We can do it at certain areas, agricultural areas. We can, so this would be then in total. We can do it around airports. We can do it around railway lines, and some roads should be covered and should be rebuilt. So that would lead to that. We could intensify and re-update some zones, residential housing zones, and remodel that. And we could use all, say, public program to intensify as well. And then this would be basically what you would have, your equipment public. So this is changeable of Grand Paris. That's more than I expected. But then they say, no, you can't, because we have rules. And these rules are about monuments, there's about height restrictions, there's about, what is now, if you reduce that, this is what actually at the moment is impossible to do, which would lead that this is still then the space considerable. Okay, still doable, I would say. So we could deblock some of the rules. That's going to happen. You have maybe read that now the last days in the newspapers, that this is taken over. Some of the zones will be deblocked, as it's called. Another kind of zoning act is going to be applied. And that, I think, is interesting, that what he says, law follows plan in that case. I think that's what we have to achieve. That's architecture. Because then you start to work on. So then in total we would have about this. Another thing is that we don't need all of that, actually. We still, and here here was a conflict in the discussion. I still think that the centrality of Paris is very good. And it's hard to say in network discussion that you all have in urbanism. Why can't we not say centralize it again? We don't need all this. Actually, with like a low density, this is what we should need of this il y a d'espace diagrams. Or actually with higher density that, or with higher density. It's Paris plus petit, what's happening. So we started to look, and what can you then say how can we then mix it? Because compactness is about mixity, and where can one help the other? Work with work, as we say in Dutch. And that's, so I will show some of them. From in the landscape, okay, these are the zones for the new Forêt de Paris, a national park, which is going to be, this is adopted by the president this week. About energy, these are the zones for the windmills, and a new type of windmill, like 3 windmills on top of each other, will be made and becomes really grand at the moment and monumental. I mean, they're 500 meter high, so they're quite okay. And the solar park is adopted as a program. So next time you see golden roofs when you go on Centre Pompidou, and you look down, you see only treasure of gold of the solar park that will be there. The Seine gets a hydrological function. The infrastructure, we reduce one airport and we concentrated on Charles de Gaulle. That is accepted as well, and surrounded with a forest, and on the DBA line, the new highway and the new addresses for the airport. So you land in the forest. Welcome to Paris. Le Grand Gare de l'Europe. This is my favorite, because in Paris all the trains end. You have the terminus, Gare du Nord, Gare de l'Est, Gare de Montparnasse. You know it. It's amazing. There's no city in Europe where trains end. They always continue. And I think it's rather, it says something about Paris. It's rather elitist, one could say. So, and it's very unhandy, because when you have to get a train to Lyon, then it doesn't work. So we say, okay, let's connect them. We make a new cross under Paris, and we put all the railway down so that you have a huge terrain to build in that moment. And what happens, of course, is a fantastic carrefour, a crossing point of the new Gare de l'Europe. And of course it can be 2 positions, as we said, or under the Place de la République, évidemment, or we do it under the Halle, and help Delanoë, the mayor of Paris, to make the Halle better, because I think the plan they chose is horrible. So we invest and propose, and that's happening now, in a new ring line, an RR, which is underneath the Boulevard Périphérique. Which gives us, with the new connections, turns into a new park and gives new addresses on underneath, or more flux. I'll not go into that. And we make more access in the city. The one traversée is too specific. New destinations. So optimize, say, and a new metro program everywhere, evenly accessible. Huh? Liberté, égalité, fraternité. These are easily then these kind of programs emerge on the new connections, beautiful hills, like in the best tradition of Butte-Chaumont. And we do the same with the housing program, that we invest in social housing as one of the bigger projects that's going up here. We say that's not only in the banlieue, also Haussmann has to be solidaire, add one layer in the planning commission of the central zone of Paris. You will not see it, and it go up easily. You get a kind of new, beautiful roof over Paris. We use all the, I love this project as well. We use all the public zones in the city to update the schools and update the sports halls, the tennis complexes, and they're always very bad. I mean, like every country, we are already proud that you have a school, you know, but the schools are very poor quality, and so you have to update it. But if you use housing for that, you can have extra money and extra benefit to make that school better. So here you see that we suggested to lift the schools and to use housing underneath. You get a new plateau through Paris, where you proudly show, like I showed for the museum in Rotterdam, the old schools. Of course, the grand ensembles have to be innovated, but that's so obvious that, and the sprawl is taking part of it as well. One of the last projects that's happening is that there's a selection of parks that will be designed by 10 famous landscape architects. The Bois de Boulogne is horrible at the moment, so let's redesign it. Get rid of the shrubs so that that everyone can cycle there, and there will be no harassment anymore, and that and surround it with program, and that has been accepted as a project as well, so that you will have then this kind of, say, new edges around the parks, and they become visible. There is the Parc de Saint-Cloud, there is the Parc de Versailles, and you know it from a distance, and it gets an address with it. I love that one. And last project we propose is like, okay, let's use the Seine as well, and the definition of you can build higher around the Seine, and make that zone, the inondation zone, visualize that, because that turn, because of the climate changes, immediately into a wider Seine. And I think the Seine needs that. It's too cute and too in order to survive. So you see how that can become quite nice. And we end with this observation. I think this operation needs an address. It needs one place where the coming 10 years, and that's going to happen now, that's nice, where we all gather and we discuss how that should be done. A Maison de Grand Paris, and why should that not be in the Sorbonne? So instead of this kind of splintering act of all the universities in '68, where everything moved out and was like, I don't never know in Paris where I have to go for the biochemical research. Get them partly together. And that's what we suggest on this place, on Jussieu, where I worked upon 10 years ago, or 15 years ago in OMA. And let's make there a new tower that symbolizes this operation. So that here that could be the platform, and KM3 in a mini format to discuss that direction. And then Paris becomes plus, aggressive, petit, and that's what you can say here. But all these projects here in the landscape, actually, with all the calculations we did, you only need this as a landscape. And then, now we have a good score of Paris. Now we're talking about something which can be grand, which is responsible and ambitious, and wants to give then that way a synthesis to between urbanism and architecture, and between, say, small scale and large scale, exactly on the moment of this crisis. And thank you very much for your attention.